Welcome to Book Notes. I'm Mike McCurry, and we're here today for a discussion about a book that I think will be a must-read for leaders in the nonprofit community. It's a pleasure to welcome two of my guests, Morino, the founder of Venture Philanthropy Partners, and Lynn Taliento, partner at McKinsey & Company. Tell me a little bit about managing to outcomes. I'm familiar in doing my own nonprofit work with program evaluation, things like that, but I gather this is something really different. What is managing to outcomes?
Managing outcomes is having the information on a continuous basis to do your job well. You're running an organization and you simply need the right data. Operational information, financial information, and data that tells you whether you're doing what you claim you're doing. And if you don't have that, it's very difficult to know that you're having any effect.
It's every day, and it's not just data-based, it's conversation-based. It's every minute when you're with your team or with your constituents or staff that you're asking those questions. How are we doing? How do we know how we're doing? Data is a critical piece of it, but it's much more of a mindset.
If this is working, what do you start seeing? What are the benefits that start accruing to the nonprofit? Tell us a little bit about what happens.
The long term, the single best thing that will come out of this is that the people that are receiving the benefit, the ultimate client or patient, and whatever the case will be, will see a better quality care or program. So there's really a legitimate, measurable, meaningful social impact that comes out. That's the first thing. The second thing, you see an organization with a different capacity and a different ability to operate, their ability to learn, their ability to improve changes, because now they're seeing information, they're using it within a culture of openness and transparency in that change. And I think when you have information, it is the single best basis you have to improve yourself.
I think when the team is inspired and energized by knowing that they're measuring what they're doing and they can see what works and what doesn't, it spurs innovation. They come up with more and better ideas of how to improve their operations, and they're excited by it. And I would also say, from a leadership perspective, you spend a heck of a lot less time selling the organization. You're not pitching it as much, you're simply sharing its results. And I think it creates a really sound foundation for CEOs to go out to the market, if you will, to fundraise and to get support, because they've got the story that doesn't feel like spin, it feels like facts.
You've got one great example in this book of how you learn things that are critically important by doing some of the measurement of outcomes, and it's the story of the Latin American Youth Center that's based here in the Washington, D.C. area. But tell us a little bit about that.
This is a great example of why measuring performance matters. The Latin American Youth Center created a program for families to educate them about domestic violence, and basically try to teach, namely the males in the family, that this is not acceptable behavior. What they found out through measurement is that it was actually having the opposite effect. The men felt, well, this is kind of a normal part of our culture. This is it became much more accepted to them.
So exactly the opposite.
The opposite effect. Because they had the data, they realized that. They took the program and its design to some experts in domestic violence, and they actually redid the program. And ultimately, when they relaunched it, they measured the effect, and it did have the effect in the right direction, namely that men realized this wasn't appropriate behavior and that it was less acceptable to them than before the program started.
Mario, one of the subtitles of the book is that managing the outcomes is going to be particularly important in an age of scarcity, as you call it. What do you see as the pressure that's going to come on nonprofits as a result of budget cuts, some of the fiscal issues that we're going to be facing as a country?
If anybody just picks up a newspaper today and take 7 days and look at the headlines, whether it's we're going to get rid of Medicare, we're going to cut early childhood development, it's already in play. The impact will be severe. There's no way this country is going to make changes without fundamental reallocations of resources. And that's going to hit the nonprofit sector extremely hard. At that stage, you have one of two things. You can either continue to go where you're at and risk losing your support, or reinvent yourself. And I think what we're going to face is many organizations are going to have to literally reinvent how they function today in a very different funding climate.
In talking about this fiscal crisis that's happening, some people might think, well, it's going to take a lot of money to institute this kind of process, but I think you argue that it's really a way that these nonprofits can weather the storm that's coming if they move to this kind of discipline, correct?
The organizations that had the capacity after 9/11 were the ones that survived the funding hits, because they were able to show what they were doing, defend themselves, persevere. What lies ahead will be far more draconian in terms of the actual financial implications. So the organization today that will be able to deal with potential donors and foundations and government funding that can show conclusively why their work is actually working and what impact it's going to be having, will be in a much better position to deal with their funders, to hold those funders, to potentially get new funding sources, but also that information becomes the very basis they will need to improve themselves, improve their services, and at certain times totally reinvent parts or all of their programs.
That's the upside. There are two other benefits. The other thing is the cost issue, right? If you free up 5% of your budget by doing this analysis, and that's a low number in terms of an expected outcome, you've more than paid for the effort.
What's the largest savings that you've seen practically in some of the cases that you've worked with?
I would put it as high as 30% in terms of over the course of a number of years, the ability to reallocate 30% of an organization's budget. It's not instant, it's never instant, but understanding where programs should focus, where the impact is, and migrating that's easily at least a 30%.
Lynn, Mario, thank you for joining us on Book Notes. It's been a very lively and good conversation.